welcome to
Hello.
Cookie Pocket. This podcast is about film. Today we are discussing Beautiful Girls, a rom-com that is very, very steeped in the 90s, directed by Ted Demy and starring a pretty loaded ensemble, including Timothy Hutton, Matt Dillon, Uma Thurman, Rosie O'Donnell, Natalie Portman, and several others. And it follows a small town and a group of men and women who are returning home for a high school reunion, and many of them are at different junctions and facing different challenges in their lives. And it's something of a coming-of-age story in disguise, you might say, given that in some senses they already have come of age, but they're still going through some processes of growing up, I would say. And this movie means a lot to me, and I'm happy to discuss it on this platform. Let's start how we always start. General impressions and ratings out of 5. What did you guys make of the movie?
Well, I gave this movie a 4 out of 5, which I think was a bit of a surprise, considering that I'm usually the cold, hard, cynical reviewer of the three. Yeah, usually, not always,
you're just cynical.
But usually, I'm the most cynical person here. But I mentioned this to both of you before we recorded. I do think this movie kind of took advantage of the mood I was in when I watched it. I had a weird week for reasons. And so I think this film kind of took advantage of that and snuck its way in when I was a little more open. And as a result, I do think it got to me. I think, like you said, it's very, very 90s. And in a lot of ways, I think many movies from the 90s have just dated incredibly poorly for me. There's something about just that 90s, just that decade that I think dates everything in a way that's kind of unpleasant, for me at least. But this mostly gets out unscathed. There's some great actors. I like how conversational it is, and how most of the time we aren't like going out and making big kind of demonstrations and performing things through big actions. It's not that kind of movie. It's very kind of, we talk about romance and growing up. We don't go out and dance in the streets and punch people until we do, which is where it kind of began to lose me in the climax. But not for long. It picked itself up after that. So I do think there are some issues. I think, I mentioned this in my review, I think the protagonists do have, some of them at least, have this kind of like meat-headed machismo around them that kind of limits what you can do with them in a scene. There are some scenes where I thought, oh, if they just talked about how they feel, it would be so much more interesting to me, and I'd be able to learn so much more about their characters, and then they don't because they're manly men. So I do think that's a little bit of a drawback in places. But for the most part, I think it's extremely enjoyable. Great actors, even if they're in only a couple scenes each. And I would probably recommend it. On the poster, it's hailed as like the best date movie of the 90s. And, you know, I don't call myself an expert on date movies, but this is probably a good film to watch with your significant other, I'd imagine.
Or Nana.
Or maybe Nana.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think there's any Nana insulting material in this.
All right, here's the dirt back so you can fill this hole you're digging for yourself, Zach.
Okay.
3.5 out of 5. I liked it. It was all right. I don't know what else to say. It was definitely pursuing accessibility a lot more than I would have expected. The characters are made more for the audience rather than for the situations that they're in. I would say it's more, there's a big focus on the themes and what you get out of it. And I think that's what makes the experience completely different for everybody. And I think it's pretty much just based on how the themes are presented. Because once you're kind of having natural characters talking with each other, it's less about like reaching archetypes or creating archetypes and trying to like the characters. It's more about liking what they're talking about and liking the feelings that they're kind of, you know, naturally showing off. And I think there's a lot of value to that. And I think most rom-coms never really even come close to that kind of creativity. In terms of the actual plot, pretty cookie cutter. I don't think it was very spectacular to me. I don't think it was like sticking out like as something like completely original, because I think the genre is kind of tired in general, and I think that might just be my own fatigue, but I think it's just like you said, Zach. Not a lot of '90s rom-coms have that, you know, those issues that just never
That's
go
fair.
away. But this one, like I agree with Zach's assessment. I think it pretty much gets away with most stuff. I think the themes are broad enough, and I think that the situations are believable to a great extent. So I think the film can really do a lot with what little it actually had being presented, and I think that's mostly a positive. I think the characters are. I think the characters are a lot more relatable than you might expect. I even think the meat-headed characters have their own sense of like way of going about socially that makes them more believable instead of kind of just like cliche.
Oh yeah.
And I know like some of the things that they're saying doesn't apply anymore, and the euphemisms and things like that are very dated. And in a lot of ways, they feel more like they're in their like late 30s than they do in their 20s. But maybe that's because a lot of people they would be in their late 30s, now, or I guess they'd be a lot older now. The 90s was so long ago, God. But it was all right. I think the movie was fine. I gave it a 3.5 out of 5. I think it's pretty good. I'd probably recommend it, especially to rom-com fans. I think it's got its own style, and I think the winter aesthetic really carries throughout the whole thing, and I think that really sets it apart too. And Willie made the right choice. That's all
I'm assuming we'll talk about that.
Yeah, I think we will.
Okay.
Yay! I'm glad neither of you actively disliked this. This is one of my favorite movies of all time. I gave it a 5 out of 5. This is my third time watching it. My first time was at school this past year. I watched it and it hit me very hard, and then I watched it again like the next day or sometime that week because I was just like, I need more of this. And I think it's really rewarding on a rewatch. You get more bits and pieces from more supporting characters. Like you notice more Kev moments actually. I think at least in the first half, and other stuff like that. There's more build up for characters, and you get to kind of live in the setting they built for themselves a little bit more each time. I think you guys pretty much described this perfectly. It is a romantic comedy in the 90s, and its best strength is I think the dialogue and the screenplay. And you guys touched on the sort of, or I guess Zach did. They're very like manly men, and they certainly say and do things that would not be perceived as acceptable and now. And
yeah.
That's something to take note of, but I also think it makes the town feel a lot more real because these are imperfect people, and it's true that none of them are great about talking about their feelings, except maybe occasionally Willie and Mo, but the others really not at all. But I think you get little glimpses, like Matt Dillon's character, Tommy. You see everything you get from him is facial expressions and interactions he has with like his girlfriend / his ex-girlfriend, and the sort of back and forth adulterous behavior where he's trying to chase the thing that he had in high school that he's lost, and he's kind of the prototypical peaked in high school, and he doesn't know where his life is going. And there's something similar amongst the other men. Michael Rappaport's Paul is, to me, one of the standout performances, even if I don't think of Rappaport as a really virtuosic actor. There's the one scene where he's like crying as he's plowing the girl's driveway, and you can tell he's really lost in this sort of dreamland of beautiful girls, which culminates in probably the most iconic speech towards the end of the movie, when Willie's talking to him about all the pinup models on his wall. But I think we'll discuss that too. Before we get into that, though, as I pull up my outline, how did the setting... Go ahead, Zach.
I was just going to say, while you do that, I do think that my note about the characters kind of being meat-headed macho men, I think that's a note that very much comes with the film's age, though, as well. Because I think in the 90s, these are just, standard male protagonists. I think it's kind of in the decades since then that we've gained this expectation that, men don't just hit and wrestle. They also talk about things as well. I think that's become a lot more standard in the 3 decades since then that maybe it was in the early 90s when this was made.
Yeah.
A bit more standard.
A
I know
bit
people
more.
that are exactly like Paul in real life.
No,
Those people
yeah.
definitely still exist, but I'm just saying in terms of representation in fiction, I think there's more of an
Yeah.
expectation now that all characters talk about what they feel in moments of conflict rather than just hitting each other after doing shots.
Sure.
Yeah.
I think I'm somewhere in between you two because I think Zach's right. I think more films portray men that way now, but I think it's in some ways more realistic to have these men who can't really or don't process their feelings that way. Like Mitchell said, I think there are still people like that, you know, for better or for worse. But anyway, how did the setting, this sort of small town, you get the sense that it's kind of Bostonian or in the Massachusetts area. How did the setting, and this is both time and place, contribute to your enjoyment of the film? Was it a subtractor? Was the 90s nostalgia distracting, or did you find it suited the topic well?
It's mostly pretty well integrated. I would think the small town winter thing has obviously been done a lot of times before, but I feel like it's pretty well integrated because I feel like the it being so out of the way and so foreign kind of helps with the pursuits of the characters being like they have to go out of their way to go to this reunion and things like that and go out of their normal lives. So you feel like they're really disconnecting from what they are usually doing to follow these false pursuits most of the time and just see how it plays out. I think the just having it in winter, you kind of just tonally helps a lot because you feel genuinely warm feelings and cold feelings in respective settings. Things are generally a lot warmer and closer when the camera is a lot closer to them and they're in an enclosed setting. Big external conflicts generally happen when it's colder and it's outside. So I think that's a pretty nice nuance. And I think it showed to me pretty early on, and I think it works really well.
Yeah, I am also a fan of the setting, but I personally I think that the kind of the way the movie's made has that 90s feel to it, but I don't think the setting of the 90s really has much of an effect on the plot because it takes place in this small town.
Yeah.
I mean, in kind of smaller towns, time kind of stops. And yes, they do have video games and, you know, the newest magazines and things like that. But they, you know, the types of jobs that they work there, one of them is like a plant manager. The other one works in a mill. Like, the other one drives a snowplow. Like, these are jobs that people have had since the 50s and will probably continue to have for decades to come. Like, life goes on in this small town despite what they've gone on to do, what some of them have gone on to do in the big city. And I think that does help because I think if this was set in the city, it would have even more of a problem with that kind of 90s datedness because I don't think anything's dated worse than 90s cool, which you'd come into contact with a lot more in the city. But I do think that also setting it in a small town, especially in winter, which I think is kind of an inherently reflective time. There's something about like empty streets at night with snow falling that I think makes everybody think about something whenever they want to think about.
It's cold.
It's cold, sure, but I think there's something about that weather that's kind of universal for reflection, and so I think that really helps. One of my favorite shots in the film, even though none of the shots in this I think especially wow, is when Uma Thurman she runs into Matt Dillon. She doesn't run into Billy Crudup. Billy Crudup is not in this movie. She runs into Matt Dillon, and then he drives away, and she continues walking along kind of the darkened street at night. There's like a single street lamp in the background. It's snowing. And I just love that shot because, I mean, it makes me think like the characters are thinking within the context of the film. So I think the setting really contributes to that. It draws you into the looking glass just like the characters are drawn back into it.
Yes. Yes. This is good. Okay. I'm going to return to a sort of plebeian non-film scholar question that I've used in past episodes. Who was your...
Movie?
Huh?
Is this a war movie? This has quite a lot in common with the Deer Hunter.
Who is my favorite what?
Who is your favorite character / what is your favorite performance in this film?
Oh, Natalie Portman! Oh my god!
I mean, that is the correct answer, but please go on.
Oh my god. Willie is my favorite because he's the most stoic and says I don't know about 20 times, and I can relate to that. And that's about it. Oh, and he's the only one with an actual redemption arc because all the all the three other guys have like, they're basically picking up the pieces. They're kind of redeeming themselves or attempting to redeem themselves after all the mistakes they made. Willie's like just vibing the whole time, and he's thinking about making a mistake, but he finally doesn't, and then redeems himself. And that's what I think is cool about him. So
Nice.
Okay, so I think maybe the performance that kind of captivates me the most is probably Timothy Hutton as Willie, but I want to also give a shout out to an incredibly small character that I like a lot, who is, I can't even remember the character's name. He's the guy at the high school reunion that tells off Darian.
Yes!
Oh my God.
Yes!
Bro.
And that's,
bro.
I think that
guy.
is, I think that's a great little moment, and I like that is the only thing we get at the reunion. I'm kind of leeching into what might be a future question here, but I do like how in any other rom-com, especially a lesser rom-com, this would end at the reunion, and everybody would have conversations very briefly and make up their differences and then have a dance battle or something, and it would end on a freeze frame. But here, the reunion doesn't matter at all, really. Like, there's one scene in the lobby, and then that's all we see of the reunion, because those days are over, and it's about moving into the future. And I think it's great that it's just this one guy who gets to, like, he's moved on, and she hasn't, and he gets to tell her that, and I think it's a great little moment. I don't know the actor's name, I don't know the character's name, but good job, mate.
Yeah. Oh, I'm so glad you brought attention to that. I wasn't going to bring up the reunion or that moment at all, but I totally agree. I do think the standout here is Natalie Portman. I already talked about why I like Michael Rappaport's Paul. He's up there for me too, because he just feels very real to me. I think it's because he's just playing himself to some extent, but if it works.
Yeah.
I think Natalie Portman steals pretty much every scene and kind of the whole movie. She's very little screen time relative to the adults, but like everything she says is almost a little too witty. Like I basically could have written the rundown with only her lines, and I kind of did a little bit, not to spoil it, but there's just so many like little witticisms, and you do get the sense that she's an old soul, and it's just the perfect counter to Willie's, to Timothy Hutton's Willie, and it's, I think, probably the most important signifier of the characters sort of always reaching back into the past when they need to move on. She's like the perfect characterization of that. And yeah, she's brilliant. The only reason I even knew this movie existed and watched it is because I'm on a sort of long quest of watching everything that prominent Star Wars actors have been in. And so I watched this because Portman was in it. And it became one of my favorite films, more so than any other Star Wars movie I've ever seen. So
I think I might need to watch it again to fully appreciate her performance. I'm glad they brought up Lolita, because I think the scenes with her do have this Lolita-esque quality where I was just desperately uncomfortable and wanted them to end. And I think now that I've seen them and know where they go, perhaps I need to watch them again to get a better feel for her performance itself. Because I was just like a rictus mask of fear and apprehension during her scene.
I can't blame you.
The whole time.
Yeah, no, it's tense. And it takes, I think, a great amount of care to navigate that sort of subplot at all without making it awful. And I do think they kind of get away with it. And as Mitchell said, Willie gets his redemption and makes the right choice. And I think that's really important and serves the film well. But we were talking about a moment that you guys then said we might discuss in greater detail.
We're talking about Thomas Gibbous,
Did you find his name?
the voice of Shikamaru Nara from Naruto as well. So there you go.
I don't
His
know.
middle name is Wayne. He's from Minnesota.
Wow. I don't know where to go from there.
That's a research team. Meme
Gosh.
Lord and research team, Mitchell.
Thank you.
Okay, speeches. This film has a lot of big speeches.
Yeah.
Namely, Willie talking about how he can't be Marty's poo to her, Christopher Robin. Paul giving a speech about an all-powerful, beautiful girl being as good as love. Rosie O'Donnell taking down Dylan and Hutton a peg because they have unrealistic images of women. and Matt Dillon in the hospital bed talking about how he thought his life was going to be somewhere at this point and it just isn't there at all. And I'm sure there's maybe one or two I'm forgetting, but which of those stuck out to you? And I don't know, just talk about the speeches to me, I guess. What made them work? What made them not work?
Like watching Bush Jr. era speeches during the Second Iraq War. I enjoy going back to controversial things from a while ago.
Oh dear.
So watching Rosie O'Donnell.
Spin
Zach,
team!
I'm fine.
There we go.
I'm not spinning. Spin nothing, okay?
Okay.
I enjoy watching Rosie O'Donnell talk about things that were very relevant at the time in terms of the wave of feminism, okay? Just let me finish my point. It makes a lot of sense.
Okay.
All right?
It does.
So that was my favorite speech, okay? The way the camera followed her and everything, and how hard hitting it was compared to the kind of slow building up of everything and kind of just letting things slowly unravel, all chill and cool. And then she's like, "You guys are freaking annoying." And then I just think that effect works so well for me. And watching her character later on, she stuck out to me a lot, and I think she was a very necessary character. I think she added a good, amount of spice to the butter noodles of the film.
Nice.
Yeah. There's two I think that had the most impact on me. I think all the speeches work to a certain extent, even if they're not necessarily speeches that you can get behind. I think they're framed in a way where you can get behind their inclusion in the film. Like the Michael Rappaport speech immediately ends with Timothy Hutton saying, "Okay, I'm going to go check your fridge for heads," which I think is a nice kind of punch to the end of that speech where most audience members, at least me, are going, yeah, that wasn't it. But the two speeches that I think affected me the most, Matt Dillon's in the hospital bed about him not being where he wants to be, really got to me. Because as established by our discussion on The World's End, I do have a real fear of ending up in that kind of place. I have a real fear of kind of this, or even high school, being the best I'm ever going to do and ending up running a snowplow and doing nothing with my dreams and aspirations in like a decade.
Doing a podcast.
So that really got to me. And then the other one is the speech by the ice rink that Hutton makes to Natalie Portman, solely because they invoked the name of Winnie the Pooh, which everybody has a thing that kind of represents childhood and innocence and youth to them, and mine is Winnie the Pooh. I don't know why. I was never really attached to that character as a kid, but there's something about that idea of growing out of things and leaving behind things that you once loved that I think is really poignant and really effective. And it was kind of that comparison that made me go, okay, this dynamic is kind of makes sense to me now. It is solely on that like comparison did it start to work for me and kind of slacken that shocked Easter Island face that I had been making until then.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Willie's like, "Uh-oh, I'm kind of sus," and then he kind of backs out of it.
Yeah. Great cutaways to the other girls across the rink, by the way. I think the inclusion of those is great and gives some context for
Mo's
his
like,
thought
"Oh!"
process at the time.
Yeah, the cutaway to Mo. Yeah.
Mo, oh no!
Wow. Yeah. Oh my gosh, I can't even tell you how glad it makes me to hear those things coming from you, Zach. This movie did exactly what I wanted it to do for you. I feel very fulfilled.
Think about Winnie the Pooh.
No, yeah. Honestly, I feel the same way.
Realize that you're Eeyore, Zach. Christian is Piglet and I'm Tigger.
Oh dear.
Who's who?
I don't know. I couldn't make anyone else.
Or is Kevin Tigger?
Oh no.
Oh dear. You've been brought behind the curtain, audience. I hope you're enjoying this.
Yeah. Now we really need the spin team.
Yes.
Keep going, Chris.
Hello, spin team. I think Winnie the Pooh must be all three of our figures in that sense, because it similarly works for me for that reason. And I totally agree. But I guess I'll talk about Paul's speech because we didn't touch on that. I think it is really brilliant in the context of the film because he's so wrong, but maybe he's not so sure of himself, but he presents himself as sure of himself. He's like, "That is as good as love, Willie. That is as good as love." And you can tell he has to say things twice and punctuate it with such vigor and conviction because if he doesn't, he'll realize how wrong he is. But he's gone so far with this idea that there's like no going back, and he's already lost this girl that he only realized he really loved after he lost her. And I think it's an important tragic character, because if all of them ended up like Willie by the end of the movie, it just wouldn't feel as real, and there wouldn't be the real understanding and threat of being stuck where you once were, instead of progressing to a point that you want to be at.
Right.
All right. I think we've discussed the most important things. Thank you guys for watching this. This film is very near and dear to my heart. I'm glad you got something out of it. Any final thoughts?
I wish the climax wasn't as big as it is. I do think the climax kind of sticks out to me. If you read my Twitter review, it's the incongruously kinetic portion that I'm mentioning, because like I said, it's mostly a very subdued conversational movie until the climax, when Matt Dillon is beaten up behind a bar, and then the rest of the guys go over to Steve's house and beat him up, and then a car almost gets tipped over by a snowplow, and it feels like it's become like a totally different movie for a second. I do wish it was a little smaller, and I wish we got more from Steve. I wish he wasn't, because he is kind of this two-dimensional frat boy, like, jerk, pretty much, is the way the film portrays him. And it's basically only by the virtue of, oh, you have a daughter, that he's kind of spared. When in reality, I'm sure he has a perspective on the issue, and I'm sure he has some kind of insecurities, and I'm sure he's not just a complete jerk. And I would have liked to see more of that, which is why maybe in a more modern version of this film, there wasn't that fist fight, or at least there's a conversation between the two of them beforehand that lays out their perspectives on the issue. But I mean, aside from that, that was kind of the only portion that made me go, I feel like this movie's lacking something. But yeah, 4 out of 5. Perhaps I'll watch this again someday, and perhaps I won't be in the mood that I was when I saw it the first time, and it will receive my ire. But for now, I think it got in that window and did get to me.
I thought you were just going to say I'm not going to be alone or something, but all right.
Oh, dear.
I'm not going to willingly watch this alone again, but 3.5 out of 5. I liked it. I was mostly surprised and endeared. Is that a word?
Yes.
It was endearing to me. There we go. And it was the conversations were really intriguing and very natural, and I don't know. I think it was all right. I don't think there was anything that was like too mind blowing to me. It didn't like connect with me or anything. It was its own vibe. It was just chilling. And besides the climax, like Zach said, which I guess was all right. It was a little bit out of place for me, but most of the film was fine. So yeah, 3.5 out of 5. I think it's pretty darn good. It definitely sticks out. Like it's not a diamond in the rough, but it's like one of the really shiny like rocks you see at like the mining, you can mine stuff as a kid, panhandle or whatever for kids. And there's like one that's like really bright and really shiny, and you're like, I'm gonna get this one. So it's like that one. Yeah.
There's a lot of mica in that stone.
Yeah. There's a lot of mica.
I'm willing to forgive the kinetic ending, because it gives us kind of the only moment where we see Mo brought down a peg. Like, he's kind of the one guy who settled the whole movie until he's like beating up this father of a young child. And I'll also forgive it because it gets Matt Dillon in that hospital bed to deliver that amazing speech. So, but I do understand like the punch sound effects and the it's a little snappy, but I'm willing to forgive it. I think this film is brilliant. I would strongly recommend it to anyone with the slightest interest in romantic comedies, because I just think this is super smart. A cheesy tagline I saw on, I think, the DVD or Blu-ray case was like, smart, sexy, and a whole lot of fun. And I think it's very smart. And maybe not a ton of fun. Honestly, I don't know. I think there's more to it.
Sexy. If you're Paul.
Oh, jeez. It's terrible. I think there's much more to it than it just being a fun movie. But but I also don't think it's a miserable slog that you watch and feel nothing but depressed by the end you're done. So I think there's meaning there and enough entertainment that it's approachable for pretty much anyone. I highly recommend it. 5 out of 5 for me. This is my 5th favorite movie of all time on my Letterboxd. And thank you, Zach and Mitchell, for discussing it with me. All right.
Of course.
Mighty welcome.
Now it's time for Week in Review.
Yes, indeed. Well, I'll just jump right in the pool. Today...
Don't hurt yourself.
Careful, there wasn't much water in there. I jumped in the shallow end. Today, I watched 2015's We Are Still Here, which a lot of people probably recognize the title of, but many people probably haven't seen. It's a lower-budget horror film in which a husband and wife whose son has just died. The wife is played by Barbara Crampton, and the father is played by, or the husband, rather, is played by a man you've probably never heard of. They move into this empty house after their son has died, only to find strange goings-on beginning to occur, and the mother becomes convinced that the spirit of their son is in the house. It's a very typical kind of horror movie concept, and the film does, I think, suffer from a lot of horror film tropes. It kind of wears its influences on its sleeve, particularly influences from The Changeling, which we talked about 48 episodes ago on this podcast.
George C. Scott's face.
How about that?
Oh my god.
But at the same time, this movie it's obviously quite low budget, and for that reason, it feels kind of like a student film, and I say that in the best way, because if you are a film student or a low-budget filmmaker, sometimes it's nice to watch a film that feels attainable, to watch a movie that you can watch and go, I understood how they do that. I recognize that camera move. I think I know what lenses they filmed this on. I think I know how they did that effect. I could make something like this if I got the right people together. And sometimes it is cool to watch a movie like that. That being said, I don't think the film is great. I gave it a 2 out of 5. I mean, sometimes that lower budget does come with some drawbacks. The acting is iffy. I mean, I do think the scares kind of lack tact, but there are moments of that guerrilla filmmaking ingenuity that really shine through. So if you're somebody who makes films, I think you'll get a lot out of this, particularly if you're somebody who's passionate about horror films. If you're somebody who just watches films to be entertained and has no interest whatsoever in making them, you can probably skip this one.
Interesting. Well, I didn't watch a film. I was perusing Letterboxd, and I somehow found Bill Wurtz's work of history of the entire world, I guess, randomly on Letterboxd, and I was looking for comedy specials and things. I don't know how I found it, but he was on there. I think it was one of the reviewers' favorites for another movie or something. I was like, oh, history of the entire world, I guess. It's everybody's pretty much seen it at this point. I don't know how many views it has on YouTube, but I'm pretty sure it's like many millions. And he does the entire history of the world, starting with a little bit of science and going into the history and everything, and then just starting to be kind of crazy about printing a brain and thing inventor that invents things at the end. But it's essentially just a big internet meme, like kind of with music that is very reminiscent of the beginnings of the internet. And Bill Wurtz literally just sings the entire history of the world and just goes over some bits and things that are hilarious to him, and he just puts them in there. So every time I watch the video, I see something I didn't see before, and I've seen it probably 30 times now. I forget how long it is. I think it's like 20 minutes or something. I don't know. But I gave it a 4.5 out of 5 because I was able to review it. And it gets a little bit annoying if you're not into that kind of style of kind of the quirky, look at me like, I hate myself kind of quirkiness that we hate in our generation today.
Yes, of course.
But there's just, he put a lot of effort into it, and it's a really interesting work. And I think that, it's really funny and, just blunt humor, very deadpan, and I highly recommend it. It's free to literally everybody who has internet access and a device, so I'd recommend watching it if you haven't yet somehow.
Mm-hmm.
Oof. Okay, I have maybe the weirdest and riskiest week in review thus far. I was sitting and I was like, I want to watch something, but I don't feel like finishing The Queen's Gambit right now because that deserves more of my attention, and nothing I got going on Hulu. I'll go to YouTube. I'll go to a channel that I used to be subscribed to. I'll go to Pimp Master Broda's channel on YouTube.
No! Oh no!
We got a cameo from this Yoda impersonator,
Yes, we did.
wherein he promotes Cookie Pocket modestly. Feel free to check out our Instagram if you haven't seen it yet. But
It's on there.
it's fun. Anyway, a lot of his content is pretty edgy and not exactly appropriate all the time.
Uh-oh.
Not good for Nana.
Yeah, not
Inappropriate.
definitely not good for Nana. Like, not always good for me. But I'll recommend you start with the Yoda explains why your mother and him are divorcing ASMR. And if that doesn't work for you, maybe leave it there.
Yeah.
He does Goofy as well.
Yeah, and a little bit of
Yup.
Jar Jar.
Yeah.
It's a weird, often offensive and crass channel, but that was my week in review, so there's that.
Well, okay.
Oofa.
I hear you fixed that tire on the Magical Cinema Tour bus, though.
Yes, it's rolling. That's what tires do. Yeah, I watched another Jacques Demy film because that's all I
Oh.
do. Yes, maybe you've heard of him. He's a French filmmaker. He did this thing with umbrellas.
You sound more pretentious than I do.
Yeah,
and
I
that's
know.
pretty rare.
Yeah. See what you're doing to me, Zach? Ugh. Anyway, I watched Model Shop, his first American film, I guess, from 1969. It's actually in English and everything. It's not a musical, but it works as something of a sequel to Lola, his first feature film, which is in French and follows this cabaret dancer named Lola who sort of struggles to find footing and a comfortable living in her life. And at this point, she's in California and working at this kind of seedy model shop where you can pay to take pictures of women in scanty clothing, and it's kind of intentionally skin crawly a little bit. And the lead is played by Gary Lockwood. His name is George Matthews, and he's sort of in between work and also trying to find meaning in his life. And it's kind of a really sad movie. Many of Demy's other works are better at encapsulating a silver lining even to sad endings. Like, spoiler alert for Cherbourg, Guy and Genevieve do not end up together, but they have families and they're happy with their families, and so tragedy and happiness can happily go hand in hand there. There's not really any real silver lining here. You get the sense that both of these characters are kind of doomed, but it's very effective. I saw in some Letterboxd reviews people were grumpy that they thought Gary Lockwood was boring or uninteresting as a lead. I didn't feel that. I think he's pretty solid. But man, am I sad that Harrison Ford was not cast in this role, because apparently Demy was eyeing him for the part, but Columbia Pictures said no. So boy, am I sad about that. But otherwise, I gave this a 4 out of 5. I'm really surprised this didn't make his Essential Criterion box set. I don't know if it was a rights issue or wasn't good enough in the eyes of Criterion, but I think it's great. It's pretty much impossible to get a hold of. You have to shell out a pretty penny to get the Blu-ray on eBay or elsewhere, but if you find a way to watch it, I highly recommend it, but definitely watch Lola first.
Okay.
All right. Sounds like my kind of movie.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
I think you would like it. Righto. Do we run it down now?
I think we do.
Yes.
Run it down.
Alrighty. We're going back to Massachusetts and saying crass things, and Zach will give us numbers in return.
He will indeed.
Mitchell, you ready to start us off?
Yeah, I guess so.
Yeah. All right. 3, 2, 1, go.
Sweet Caroline.
4 out of 5.
A Tragedy of Elizabethan Proportions.
3 out of 5.
Vegetarian and Meat Cutter.
4 out of 5.
They were all sisters. It's one big conspiracy.
2 out of 5.
MTV Playboy in Madison High School Avenue.
3 out of 5.
Natalie Portman as Marty.
3 out of 5.
Champagne, not brown.
4 out of 5.
Romeo and Juliet, the dyslexic version.
4 out of 5.
Christopher Robin and Pooh.
4 out of 5.
Hamlet. Danish prince couldn't make decisions.
3 out of 5.
Roman Polanski and Jerry Lee Lewis.
4 out of 5.
An all-powerful, beautiful girl being as good as love.
2 out of 5.
Stinky the Bartender.
3 out of 5.
Just wanting something beautiful.
4 out of 5.
Sideburns.
3 out of 5.
The promise of a better day.
3 out of 5.
The Promise of a Greater Hope.
3 out of 5.
The promise of a new tomorrow.
Yeah, 3 out of 5.
Mashing Snow for a Tremendous Sense of Self-Satisfaction.
2 out of 5.
2 words not in our vocabulary. Lunch money. Oh, 1 second.
3 out
Time.
of 5.
Ah,
I didn't say that one clearly enough.
frick.
I'm glad
Oh,
you...
the next one we're going to know exactly. That's going to be a great finale one.
Yeah.
I'm glad Sweet Caroline was in here, because I think this movie makes great use of that. It's only in it twice, but I think...
Certainly.
They
Could have been in it more than twice, Zach.
I think they made a great
Instead of
decision.
only twice?
And clearly they didn't pay for that much of it, because it gets to like a verse in the credits and then fades to something else. But because you have to pay for songs by the second in films, basically. But I think it was a great choice to end the movie on those opening notes, because it makes a great callback, and I think your perspective on the song is totally changed by the end of the movie. Yeah. Final note.
Where it began. Oh gosh, I love this movie so much. All right, somebody do the preview before I start crying.
Oh, that's me.
Hey.
Next time, we are going to be talking about a classic of Hammer horror. Now, I talked about Hammer horror, for those who haven't heard of the studio, in the past in a weekend review segment, but we're going to be talking about one of their films next week. In fact, the film that started it all for the company, their very first horror picture, The Curse of Frankenstein, or rather their very first horror picture in color, which kind of put them on the map. This is a film that I know Christian likes, and I believe Mitchell's seen and enjoyed, although I don't know that for sure. But yeah, this is going to be an interesting one to talk about, because I don't think this is quite... It's a horror classic, but it's not quite the kind of horror classic that I think a lot of us are used to in the good old US of A. It's got a very different feel to it, so I'm looking forward to talking about it.
Yes. Christian is looking forward to a horror pick from Zach, guys. This is real. This is going to be
The
good.
stars have aligned.
All right.
Mitchell's indifferent.
As usual.
Yes. Beautiful Girls is an all-powerful film, and that is as good as love. Thank you, dear listener. This has been...
Padme Amidala.
Also true. This has been Cookie Pocket, and it has been about film.